are going to go ahead and have a House bill hearing on House Bill 2090. All right, hold on. Everybody stand by, please. We are having technical difficulties.
Yeah, right.
All right, everybody. I think we are now cooking with fire. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and open the hearing on House Bill 2090 for a summary report on House Bill 2090. I would like to go ahead and call on Revisor Mike Heim to explain the bill.
Can you hear me, Mr. Chairman?
Sir.
Okay, this bill deals with persons that are employed by, they're either an officer or an employee of the state of Kansas or a local unit of government. And the real gist of the bill is in Section 3, but I'm going to run through each section just briefly. We'll get to 3 in just a minute. The first section looks like there's some significant changes, but there really isn't. It just reorders the definitions in this section of the bill. It does expand the definition of military service to cover Air Force, Coast Guard, Space Force, Kansas Army and Air National Guard, or any other branch of military service. So that's an expansion. I think it probably would have covered it under current law anyway, but this is a clarification. The changes in Section 2 are merely technical. Section 3 is, like I said, the gist of the bill. It provides that if a military, an officer's military service creates a temporary vacancy that is determined by the officer, which means officer and employee, to require a temporary appointment, the person shall submit an approved form to the designated office as set out in the next paragraph. If it's an elected official, the form shall be approved and filed with the Secretary of State. I will get back to that in just a minute. If the officer is an employee, is not an elected official, the form shall be approved and filed with the employee's Human Resources Department or other officials determined by the officer's employer. The officer shall also submit an approved form to the designated office when they return from military service, temporary military service. The subsection B provides that the appointment shall be filled if the appointing authority is an elected office. It shall be filled by a person using procedure set out in 253901. That is a procedure where the county, it's basically a partisan procedure where if you're a partisan official, you get the county partisan committees involved in selecting a replacement. I sent out or had the committee secretary sent out a balloon that would clarify that this provision where you would use 253901 would only apply if it's a partisan elected official. And if it is an elected office which is nonpartisan, then it would be as provided in terms of whoever made the appointment originally. Most local government officials, with the exception of county officials, are nonpartisan. And since this bill applies to them as well as state, it, I think, needs a clarification. I missed something in my suggested balloon. I think where if the officer is an elected official, the form shall be approved and filed with Secretary of State. I think that should be state elected official, and provide that maybe the county clerk get these if it's a local official. I'm not sure the Secretary of State wants all this, but if they don't mind, then that's not a change that you would need. The section 4, again, is just cleanup type language, and the same with section 5. So if you have questions, I'll try and answer them.
All right, Representative Neighbor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We had an experience several years ago where we had a Army representative who was called back to Afghanistan, and that was filled locally by that party person. Why do we need this if we already have it? And second of all, employees don't declare their party. And so I'm not understanding why that's in here. Somebody could help me, because workers are, they're not held to the same thing that we are.
Yeah, so I think I can clarify and then have Mike back me up here. So in 1941, which is when this original statute was passed, according to the revisor's office, currently the Army, the Navy, and the Marines are the only 3 items that are covered under current statute. The Air Force was invented after 1941. So that's the reason why the Air Force, Space Force, all those items are not in here. Additionally, they didn't include National Guard, they didn't include reserves. So basically we're going in and we're listing additional military services. As to your question about state employees were also included in the original 1941 law. They don't have to declare party or anything like that. In here, you know, the revisor just said it. In here, the HR department is simply the folks who they file their paperwork with. They say, hey, I'm going to go on military leave. And then when they come back, they just file it with their local HR office as well to return to duty.
So basically, this is adding some military divisions that were not in there prior to, and on employees, there is no change necessarily.
Really, my understanding is no. And Mike, if you would like to go ahead and elaborate.
No, I think, Mr. Sherman, you've got it correct. The only real thing is that you're placing responsibility on the person that's called to service to notify that they're going to be gone, and with a form and send it to the Secretary of State, my suggestion is that if it's a local official, you probably ought to have that form sent to the county clerk and the appointing authority for them. The same, I mean, it's not a bill of major change, I guess. It's just, it adds to the other branches of the military and provides supposedly some clarification and some notice about from the person that's going to be called up. A few years ago, there was a member of the House of Representatives, Representative Taffanelli, I think, that was called to duty twice during his stay in the House of Representatives. He later became the Adjutant General for the state of Kansas, but it does happen.
Representative Neighbor.
We also had a time, several years ago, that we had an individual in the House. I think she was in the Guard, or she could have been in the Army, and she was called back to go to Afghanistan. So, but there didn't seem to be a problem at that time. That's why I'm just asking, what is the real need?
So they were in the Army. That's,
I don't know if she was Guard or Army.
well, so I think what we're trying to do is provide clarification, making it crystal clear, because Army, well, technically, you know, the Guard or the Reserve components are under the Army, so one could argue that that is the case. We're just going in and we're making sure that it's crystal clear that if you're in the Guard, Reserve, what have you, because, again, Army, Navy, and Marines are talked about in current statute, but not the Air Force and other items. So the Air Force Reserve component or Guard are not included in that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks for your explanation.
Are there any other questions for the reviser? Representative Dodson.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. As a practical matter, it would seem to me that these only apply to the Reserve and National Guard of Air Force, Army, and the Reserve components for Marine Corps, Army, and Navy. I don't know about the Space Force yet, but if you're on active duty, you're not allowed to hold political office. So I was just confused when I was reading this to list all of the presumably active duty forces under here.
Well, I do believe that, so for instance, if somebody signs a contract and they fill out their 6-year term of that contract, there's still a clawback clause. And so if somebody were to leave the military from active duty status and become an elected official shortly after, that clawback could apply to them if we have in a time of national emergency.
So if they're assessing from civilian life into the military, that's the eventuality you're citing?
Could be. It looks like Representative Proctor's hopping up and down over here to answer your question. So Representative Proctor.
Yeah, to the question of active duty service members serving in public office, according to the Joint Ethics Rules, an active duty officer can serve in a nonpartisan position and can run for a nonpartisan office. So a active duty military officer could serve in a school board or in a city commission or council. I can't tell you the number of folks that are actually doing that in any of these municipalities, but that is not barred by their active service.
Thank you for the clarification, Representative Proctor. Does anybody else have any questions for the reviser at this time? Are there any questions online? I can't see my camera. Representative Parker.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A question for the reviser, and this is probably for any other lawyers in the room, but would it not make more sense just to eliminate the list entirely? You know, if we had been doing this a couple years ago, Space Force wouldn't have made the list. We would have been having to come back now. If we just left it as military, is that not all encompassing enough rather than having to continue to update a list of categories within that?
You could do that if you wanted. I think that the list is not I guess I would prefer the list, but you could go it the other way as well.
Mike, if that's your preference, that doesn't bother me at all. I just wanted to check clarification on
Sure.
it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Are there any further questions of the reviser at this time? All right, seeing none, we will go ahead and move into the proponents of the bill, and I will recognize Representative Proctor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A lot of the bill's already been covered, so I just want to highlight a couple things. First, as several people have pointed out, this is the current statute, but there are a lot of holes in the current statute, and this clarifies first, as several people have said, the other military services that didn't exist in 1941 when this statute was originally written, but it also specifies the mechanism by which someone declares themselves as temporarily vacant from their office or their position in the state government. And finally, it specifies the method by which that temporary replacement is selected, pointing to the other statutes in our code now. It's not really creating a new mechanism, it's just highlighting that those mechanisms exist. But the real reason that I wanted to stand to talk today is in 2 tours in Iraq and 1 tour in Afghanistan, I've served alongside National Guard members from every walk of life that have been called to serve their nation in war. And there are a lot of worries and concerns that a soldier faces on the battlefield, and one of them doesn't need to be are they going to be able to feed their families when they get back because they're not going to have a job. And that's why the federal statute already provides guarantees for those service members. And I think that you shouldn't be disadvantaged because your day job is serving the people of Kansas. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll stand for questions.
Does anybody have any questions? Representative Neighbor.
I appreciate you bringing this forth, but there are also a lot of positions that are nonpartisan that don't pay. School boards don't pay. City councils really don't pay. So I just think people should realize that a lot of those positions are not going to take away an income of a soldier. My dad was in the Navy. I totally understand, for 20 years. But I wouldn't use all of those as an example because they're community service. Thank you.
Representative Miller.
Well, it can't be said enough times that thank you for your service, Representative. What was your highest rank?
I retired as a colonel.
And did I catch you correcting a general a moment ago?
Answering a question from a former superior officer.
Okay,
sir.
thank you.
Representative Collins. I guess you can use the podium.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was just wondering, well, I tried looking through to see if there was anything in the bill, but or in the statute, but what would happen, say, if a person was called up to active duty, someone was appointed to be acting in that in their capacity while they were gone, and the term was up, it was time for re-election. Could that person run for re-election even though they weren't actually doing that position at the time, and they weren't, you know, they were deployed and were actually on active duty?
That's a great question. I'll defer to the reviser for the details, but my understanding from the statute is that they could run again even though they're not physically present, but they'd have to file the paperwork from wherever they were.
That is my understanding as well, Representative, is that under current Kansas standards, if you have an intent to return to your home, even though you are out on military service, you still have an intent to return to your residence. So you could still file and run for office. That being said, if you decided to not file and rerun for office, but you filled out the paperwork and you come back and an election has taken place since you left, you no longer have the ability to reclaim that elected position because another election has taken place since that has happened. Are there any further questions for the representative? Looking to the folks online, I'm not seeing any cameras turned on with hands up. So with that, we will go ahead and close the proponents section of the bill. Thank you, Representative, for your testimony. Are there any opponents or neutrals to House Bill 2090? I am not seeing any opponents or neutrals.
Yeah,
So both
yes. Chairman, this is
yep.
Deborah Barnes.
Okay, sorry, Deborah. Yep, I see you now. Okay, go ahead. You're in the neutral
Can,
section, if I recall correctly, right?
correct, yes. Can you hear me okay? This is my first time on WebEx.
Yes, you're doing fantastic.
Okay, so I'm Deborah Barnes, and I work for the League of Kansas Municipalities. And thank you for the opportunity to provide neutral testimony to HB 2090. And as you've heard, this bill would modify the process for temporary appointments to be made in situations where a vacancy is caused in an elected or appointed position by the absence on active military service of any officer or employee of the state of Kansas or any political subdivision thereof. And the League, like other people who've commented, appreciates the contributions made by Kansas citizens who undertake military service of all kinds, and we certainly want to be able to enable them to regain their positions. And the League understands why there may be good reason to update KSA 73 213 to 219, much of which, as we've just heard, has remained unchanged since 1941. But the reason that I'm here, and I haven't had a chance to see the redraft that Mike Heim referred to, which may look after our issues, but the reason that I'm here is that to ask the committee to clear up some confusion for cities, which is caused by the bill as presently written. So if we could just go back to that definition of officer, which is of any officer or employee of the state of Kansas or any political subdivision thereof. And as we've heard, that includes city employees and city elected officials. And the bill, as we've heard, goes on to specify the arrangements for employees and elected officials to give notification that they're going to be absent, and for the various appointive authorities to use different channels to appoint a person to temporarily fill that vacancy. But our difficulty is that cities have separate vacancy filling statutes, and they're not referred to in the bill. And they've got all sorts of arrangements for filling vacancies. I could give you a very long list of vacancies which are referred to in the statutes, with arrangements to fill them for all sorts of boards and that you could imagine. Anyway, I won't take up any more of the committee's time on that. But our difficulty is that the cities have these separate statutes. They're not referred to here. So if the intent of the legislation is for the amended statute to continue to apply for cities, then we would ask that there be some kind of reference to the city vacancy statutes in the amended statutes, alongside those that apply to county and state offices. And if the intent is for the amended statute not to apply to cities, then we would ask that the definition of officials in section 1 be adjusted accordingly. So that's my ask for the city. And of course, if we can be of any assistance to the revisers in coming to language that would reflect the intent of the committee, then we're very happy to do so. And I am here for questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Barnes. Does any of the committee members have any questions for Ms. Barnes? All right, no questions. So from what it sounds like, there is a good chance that what you're asking for as far as the municipality statutes to be included, it sounds like that might already be well underway. So thank you so much for your neutral testimony, and seeing no questions, I'm going to go ahead and close the neutral section of House Bill 2090. All right, so we are going to go ahead and close the entire hearing on House Bill 2090. We will most likely be working that bill on Thursday. So if you have any amendments or any ideas that you are wanting to propose, make sure you get with the reviser between now and then. And then we are going to go ahead and move on to discussing and working House Bill 2052. So if you want to go ahead and pull that up, I'll give you guys a few seconds here. All right, so this is House Bill 2052. It is authorizing legislative committee assistants to accept gifts of not to exceed $120 in value each legislative session from certain legislators. All right, so there are some committees that have people do motions right out the gate. Mr. Chairman, I move, blah, blah, blah. And then we have discussion. Well, we're just going to skip that procedural first motion stuff and just go into discussion on this bill. And then after discussion is had, all the amendment debate is had, then at that point, I will seek the motion to either approve or disapprove of the bill to be moved to the House floor. Okay, so with that, discussion for House Bill 2052. Does anybody have any discussion? I'm not seeing any hands online. Representative Berquist.
Just for clarification, thank you, Mr. Chair. Gifts of 120 or less, if all staff or all representatives within a committee, each individually gave up to 120, is that acceptable? You're talking about a committee that very commonly gives a certain amount of money towards a gift towards an individual staffer. Would that be acceptable to have individual gifts of up to 120?
All right, I'm going to go ahead and see if Revisor Heim is on here and if he can clarify what the meaning of the current language is of the bill and whether or not it would be, if one person could, my understanding is that one person could do $120 per person on each committee if they wanted to, up to that specific committee assistant.
I think the intent of the bill is that it's limited to $120 period, and that you can't have 10 legislators giving $120 a piece, if that was the question.
Okay, well, and the executive director for the Ethics Commission is nodding his head in the back. So I think that their interpretation of what it would be is $120 max per session, I guess. But additionally, in the bill, subsection B, it talks about how each fiscal year from an individual legislator for whom they work, so your own office assistant, or legislative committee chairperson or vice chairperson. And so our OA specifically here in the committee. Are there further questions or concerns? Representative Miller.
It's not a question, but I want to, and I don't feel impassioned about this, but I do want to run it up the flagpole and see what the sense of the committee is. I would move that on line 18 and thereafter in that sentence, everything but the period be stricken, so that we would strike the words of not to exceed a total of $120 and there would be no limit. That'd be my motion.
All right, so you guys have heard the conceptual amendment. Is there a second to the conceptual amendment before debate? All right, second is from Representative Neighbor. Okay, discussion on the amendment. Representative, do you wish to continue discussion?
No, I'm good with that. If there are no questions, I would close on my, I'm sorry.
Hold on, Representative. Representative Proctor.
I would stand in opposition to this amendment just because I think the specification of a certain dollar amount prevents kind of excessive gift giving. I mean, I could see how a escalation of force could occur where, suddenly everybody's trying to outdo each other's gifts and, we're into the $1,000 range. So I think that establishing some limit, I'm not married to $120, but establishing some discrete limit is probably a good idea.
Further discussion? Well, Representative Bourgeon?
Yeah, I would, $120 seems to be kind of provide some limitations there. I don't know that we should leave it open-ended, but it also limits us as well, so.
All right, I will add in a comment here, and then I'll call on Representative Smith. Over in the House, so I was talking to the ranking minority member, I think last committee hearing. We're not as, I don't know, maybe wealthy is the word as the Senate, but they like to give large gifts over there in the Senate. And so I think that
I think the word's generous.
well, that could be it too. Maybe we need to tax that generosity. Anyway, so I think that leaving it open-ended would be not a good idea, but I'm not, like you said, married to $120 either. Representative Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I agree. I think there should be a limit. I don't think you can leave it open. I think there should be a limit. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Collins, did you have your hand up?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was just echoing the other comments that there should be a limit, and that about the Senate being more generous. I just wonder if that's why Representative Miller came back to the House. But anyway.
No, the word there would be cheap.
Okay. Well, thank you. You said it, I didn't. But I just echo the other comments on that. Thank you.
All right. Representative Neighbor.
I know we're looking at a set amount on this bill, but I also know that several of our committees have different amounts of people, committee people on their team. So for those that are larger, you may end up with more money. So with that, I would say, could we go no more than 150, which would give a little bit more wiggle room, but is not going to be so harsh on anybody that, $5 would be okay.
So Representative Neighbor, thank you so much for the question. So our largest committees in the House are 23 people. If every person donates $5, that's $115.
150. I still will go 150.
Okay, Representative Lehan. Please use the mic.
Thank you. So just for clarification's sake, going back, is that $120 that you're able to donate for the entire legislative year?
The statute says fiscal year, yes.
So that includes your OAs, your offices, your committee assistants, everybody, correct?
That is how I am interpreting it, because it says legislative assistants and committee assistants may accept gifts, so on and so forth. So if you were to donate $5, I would imagine to the committee assistant, then you'd have $115 remaining for your office assistant. And Mike Heim, if you want to correct me on that, if that's true, if that's what you think and how you read the statute.
I thought that it would be per person that you're giving the money to. So
okay,
I think that was the intent.
Okay, then I stand corrected. So it's $120 per person.
And newbie question here. So do you have to write a receipt, or is this the honor system, or how does that work in terms of keeping track of that?
So some individuals, some elected officials use private money out of their own personal funds. Others, from what I know, use their campaign funds in order to purchase like a Longhorn Steakhouse gift card or something like that at the end of a very long session in order to try to reward their committee assistants.
So if it's personal funds, then you don't have to record that. And if it's campaign funds, then it goes into your campaign finance report, correct? Did I remember from the testimony last week that gift cards were taboo? We're not supposed to do that?
Under the current understanding of the statute, that is correct. Before that was in place, gift cards were acceptable, is my understanding. And I will, if it's permissible to the body, I would like to call Mark Scoglin up just to clarify a little bit here, just to make sure that we are crystal clear before we make this determination.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Of course, always happy to help. Thank you very much to the body. The gift cards are, for all intents and purposes, treated like cash in many of these instances. So when we're talking about a gift, the statute we're talking about is a prohibition on someone accepting compensation for something that is already part of their state duties, for their state employment. So for example, I could not be paid to give a training for ethics laws because that's part of my official state duties. I could not accept compensation for that. Gift cards are much like cash in the sense that they are functionally compensation, but you could currently, under current law, you could take an office assistant out to a lunch and pay for it, which is odd that that distinction exists, but that is how the statute is written. Compensation is the prohibition.
Okay, so Representative Lehan, just a real quick follow-up, because
Yes, sir. So I just want to, and again, I'm totally going to plead the new card here. So you can take your office assistant or your committee assistant out for lunch, and that's fine. Does that go again, or does it go towards the $120 or no? It does not, correct?
You are correct. It would not go towards that amount.
Okay. And I remember last week you had talked about everybody doing the $5, and that's taboo or that's not taboo? We can do that?
Under current law, you cannot do that because that would be an acceptance of compensation for official duties. This law, or this proposed statute, would open up a very small and narrow exception for legislative assistants to receive small bonuses of compensation, which often happens at the end of session. These have always been illegal under the current law, but we're trying to resolve it, or give the legislature a couple opportunities to resolve it before we enforce what we think is perhaps not an intended outcome of the statute.
okay. And
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
you're welcome. And real quick, if somebody wants to use campaign funds in order, now I know that, let's say this had passed, and we're not talking about current circumstances. So hypothetically, are campaign funds allowed to be used? So if I wanted to donate to my office assistant $120, you know, to go out to a food place or whatever, would that be permitted?
It would be an office holder expense, and so that you'd be essentially paying them for supporting you as an office holder. So that would be a permissible expense. It's much like, because the way that the Campaign Finance Act is written, there's 7 categories for acceptable campaign expenses. I'm not going to go through all of them. Almost all of them go through either legitimate campaign expenses, which include providing salaries or bonuses to campaign workers, or number 2, office holder expenses, and this one would fall under the second.
All right, thank you so much. We're going to, thank you, Executive Director. We're going to go ahead and get back onto the discussion of the amendment at hand here. Is there further discussion of striking the $120 amount? Seeing none, Representative Miller, you may close.
Well, if we're looking, Mr. Chairman, to intent, I don't think it was ever intended that any of this discussion should be occurring. That if someone is doing good work for you and you personally feel like compensating them, I'm not seeing where the evil is that we're trying to address. I understand the purpose of these laws, these gift-related laws, to prohibit someone attempting undue influence and inappropriate influence on decision makers. But I do not think this situation fits that category, and therefore I don't see any purpose to having a limit and provoking all these 100 questions that these things raise. Consequently, I would move my motion, and I would say, for purposes of our committee assistant, while Mr. Parker should be recorded as participating today, he has informed me he's not in the Capitol, and it should not reflect, or it should be reflected that he did not vote on any matters that we were voting today.
I appreciate that, and I think there might be one other member that's not in the Capitol as well. Yep. So can you go ahead and also make a note that Representative bishop is also not inside the Capitol building and is ineligible to vote. Okay. So you've all heard the motion. All those in favor signify by saying aye. All those opposed, no. The noes appear to have it. The noes do have it. Back on debate. Representative Miller, do you wish to still maintain the floor?
I'm too mad to talk right now.
All right. Thank you, Representative. Is there any further discussion on House Bill 2052? Representative Lee Hahn.
So Mr. Chairman, this question was asked a little bit ago, and there was just it was unclear whether that was $120 per person or total. Can we add language to that?
What was that last part?
Can we add language to clarify whether it's $120 per staff person or $120 total?
I believe with how it's currently written, it is per staff person. But also based on how it's currently written, you cannot give $120 or what have you to Representative Smith's office assistant because you felt like it, is my understanding. It has to be your office assistant or the committee assistant in the committee in which you serve on. It says from whom they work. So we will come back to that real quick. Representative Miller.
Well, actually, I think it's clear as it relates to your office assistant. I'm not sure it's clear as to which committee assistants it may apply. It doesn't say anything about the committee assistants for which you serve on. It's wide open. Mike?
Supervisor Mike Heim. I think the intent was to allow committees to still be able to donate $5 to the committee assistant. But I think also because you have the for whom they work in here, so they can give to their personal office assistant. But can you please provide a little bit of a explanation here?
Well, we can clarify it further if you want, if you think it's necessary. I'm not 100% sure it's necessary, but I'm always more than happy to try and make it better. So it's committee's prerogative.
Okay. Mark Scoglin, Executive Director for the Kansas Ethics Commission, would like to be called upon, so we'll go ahead and have him clarify for us here because he's going to be the guy that hits this with the hammer or not.
I believe the statute, with how it is currently written, is drawn around the ability to accept those gifts. And so as a result, it's clear from the statute, the way we would interpret it, that it is per individual receiving the gift. So that is how that exception is drawn, is around the acceptance of the gift. And so therefore, that's how we would look at it. So it appears clear from my reading, but obviously, whatever the committee would like to do.
Okay. Representative Neighbor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm not sure whether we are having a problem setting an amount, or are we having a problem with not having it apply? Because right now, we've been functioning illegally. We know that. So if we want to change and enable the process to continue as we've had it, a lot of the people have given $5. Sometimes people may give 10. The chairman may choose to give 20. But if the issue is how much, 115, as our chairman equated for the largest committee, could be called ample. But if you think that is too restrictive, as many of you have said, then are we looking at raising that? Because I'm not hearing from any of those up or down. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Representative. So do you have a motion that you want to try to increase it?
Mr. Chairman, I would move that on line 16, on line 19, a total not to exceed 150, which should open the door for some to give more or some to give just the $5 limit. But it seems reasonable that it's up to that amount, so you don't have to give that amount. That just gives you wiggle room. And with that, I would stand for questions.
Is there a second on the motion? Representative Collins seconds. Discussion. Seeing no discussion, Representative, you may close.
As I said, this doesn't mean you have to give 150. What it does allow each committee to do is have a little wiggle room, whether they're larger or smaller, or what they feel is best for their assistant. So with that, I would move my motion.
You've all heard the motion. Those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no. The ayes have it. Motion carries, and that has been amended to 150 on line 19. Is there further discussion on the bill? Representative Dodson. Yes, I think the revisor will go ahead and take care of that. Mike, are you going to take care of the description at the top of the bill?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Further discussion? Seeing none, what is the will of the committee? Representative Neighbor.
Sorry, I would move that we adopt the balloon with the addition of the $150 and pass out House Bill 2090 favorable for passage.
It's House Bill 2052.
Okay, 2052. I'm sorry, I'm looking at the wrong.
All right.
But
Just
2052.
so we're crystal clear, I want to go ahead and reiterate the motion.
Yes.
The motion is to pass out House Bill 2052 as amended favorably for passage, correct?
That is correct, sir.
Okay. Do I have a second? Second from the Vice Chair, Representative Berquist. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, no. The ayes have it. House Bill 2052 is passed. Okay, committee, we're going to shift.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Representative Miller.
For the record, I'd like to make a formal demand for the refund of my $10 illegally gotten by you serving as vice chair for 2 years.
I think the statute of limitations has expired for that. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and shift gears to 2053. And this is requiring electronic filing for campaign candidate finance reports. So we are going to go ahead and open this up for discussion. And so who would like to speak to this bill? Seeing no discussion. What is the will of the committee? Representative Berquist.
Chairman, I would move that we pass 2053, House Bill 2053 out favorably for passage as presented.
All right, and is there a second? Second from Representative Miller. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, no. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. House Bill 2053 is passed, and that is it for committee today. So I will see you all on Thursday. Committee adjourned.